Oh, welcome to Subjective Insights. Today, tired sleepy Chris again. 3 hours sleep in 2 days, Chris again. You know, the kind of Chris that's gonna ramble inanities insanely until your earlobes go numb from all the nonsense that comes from his gob. Maybe. That kind of Chris again. Anyway, today I'm going to talk about how, or rather where, I think most ideas come from. Now then, if you talk to a lot of people, the illusion that they suffer under is a form of hypnosis, is that later stage development in idea development, yeah, that makes sense. They speak of them and treat them as if they were the original thoughts. Now, I don't believe this is true. I believe that all these ideas are built up from a understructure. And I don't think I'm saying anything new here. I think Karl Marx is referring to this kind of phenomena when he talks about the structure and the superstructure, or the ground and the superstructure, where he says a lot of the ideas that we talk about and that are learnt in universities and are in textbooks and in philosophical texts, they arise out of the economic under foundation. The structures and systems of thought are merely reflections or kind of justifications built upon the underlying economic structure. Now, for example, to illustrate this point, you can see most people around now, they have this belief in a kind of spirit that is within this body and is controlling this body. So they divide themselves in two. You have on the one hand the body, and on the other hand the spirit or the soul. Soul and spirit, as people talk about them, are interchangeable. And what this comes from, that idea, that division, that structure of thought, could have arisen as a kind of justification procedure for master-slave relationships, or even parent-child relationships. Like the idea of God that we have. The current idea is God as a kind of king, a kind of sovereign. Well, no, the current idea put forward by most mainstream Christians now, and I've spoken to a lot of them, who negate free will and don't go in for what Calvin said, is of a more democratic God, you know. So it's funny how the concept of God changes with the underlying power structure. So when kings were sovereign and they could do what the fuck they wanted, we imagine God being a king who was sovereign, who chose or elected certain people for glory in heaven, and chose or elected other people for hell, purely based upon his whim, purely based upon his decision, not upon any merit of the subject at all, which is this. It's a kind of cosmic image of the absolute monarch. And then, as you go back in the Bible and you read through that text, you see that in certain times the way God communicates with his followers, say like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and all that, it is very similar to how that family interacted within itself. So take, for example, the story of how Isaac ended up marrying, I think it was Rebecca. It could have been Jacob, but it doesn't matter who married Rebecca, what their names were. The Christians, people know, and you can look in the Bible and see it. So Abraham is all like, oh, I want to get a nice wife for my son Isaac. I don't want him marrying any of these fucking Canaanites and with the idol worshipping and stuff like that, because I know the one true God. Hey, you servant, can you go off and find for my son this pretty girl that's from my family? And so the servant goes along. And then you look at how the kind of interaction God has with his people is very similar to the interaction a patriarch, that is a kind of male head of a household, would have had with his family. And of course, the texts were written much later. Even according to the tradition, Genesis was written by Moses, and that would have been at least about 700 years later than Abraham. maybe a bit earlier or a bit later. And so they retroactively kind of made God the founder of that way of being, rather than that way of relating between individuals being the foundation for that image of God. And the way that concept or the idea would have arisen would have been through like spontaneous creative acts of people. People would look around them at phenomena they don't know, they don't understand, and the act of coming to know and understand something is making it familiar. That's essentially what it is. And so they take ready-to-hand structures of thought, ready-to-hand patterns that they notice in everyday life, and then they transpose those onto the exterior reality, like with the soul and the spirit and the body phenomena. But when you look at reality itself, when you just shut the fuck up and just watch it as it happens, it offers no interpretation. It allows any interpretation. I mean, the criteria for validating or unvalidating interpretations we have now is a scientific one. But yet again, it's based in power, in that we use the predictive capacity of an interpretation to validate it, because that enables us to interfere with the world at our will much better than any other kind of criteria for choosing between interpretations. Goodbye!